Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of The Kevin Moore Show. Now, on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, Preston Dennett. Now, Preston began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986 when he discovered that his family, friends, and co workers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. Now, he's a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and the author of 27 books and more than 100 articles on UFOs and the paranormal. Preston Dennett, welcome to the show.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I really appreciate you coming on this late as well, because I know, I say late. It's in the evening time. You're in California, so maybe it's a bit later my time, but still, it's great to have you on. And you've done about 27 books on ufology. That's a lot of books, Preston. You started this back, you just said off air there to me, 1986, 87?
Yeah, it was mid-November 1986, heard a report on the news about a sighting over Alaska, and I just assumed the guy was lying or misperceiving, but it was a pilot. And this was a major pilot. Turned out it's actually a really major case, which created a lot of waves in the field. But at the time, no, the newscaster just kind of laughed about it nervously, made a few jokes and moved on. But I was intrigued because I remember my brother, Mark, had said he'd seen a UFO. I didn't believe him. I don't think anyone in my family did. But some did. Turned out they had seen UFOs. Yeah, I found out a bunch of people I knew had actually had encounters. And that alone was mind-blowing to me. I couldn't believe it. I was angry. Yeah, I was actually really angry.
Yeah, I mean, what was it like back in 1986? Well, 1986, late 1980s, to be involved in that field? I mean, I can't imagine. Was it a big kind of field back then?
I kind of caught the wave. I think the late 1980s was when Bud Hopkins' books were really starting to catch on, Missing Time and Intruders. Whitley Strieber had just come out with Communion. Gary Kinder had written a book about Billy Meyer, the Swiss contactee, the book called Light Years. And those kind of blitzed the media. Communion became a best-selling book. And the field just took off. So I kind of rode that wave right when it was, I think, starting to really ramp up. But I'm actually a latecomer the way I look at it. I was shocked to find out that this was a subject that had been studied for decades. And when I came in the field, it was fairly well known, I think, to the average person that what a UFO was. But boy, you got a lot of strange looks when you brought up this subject. Not like now. It's changed for sure.
Oh, well, yes, with the advent of YouTube and just so many sort of releases of dumps of documentation, and there was one just recently, wasn't there? Was it by the CIA? There was some sort of classified releases.
Yeah, we're getting regular releases from all kinds of governments across the world.
What a strange time to release it right now, of all times. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's sneaky the way I look at it, because it slides under the news cycle. You know what I mean? This should be front page news. When the Pentagon said UFOs are real, that should have been front page news, but kind of slipped right by.
Yeah, it did. Now, you had your first sighting, I think it was 92, 93, with your sort of own personal encounter. What did you see?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 92. It could have been 93, late July. I was in the middle of investigating a huge wave of sightings over Topanga Canyon, and it was driving me a little crazy because I was still trying to come to grips with this phenomenon, that it was real, that it was pervasive, that epidemic proportions. So I was going over to my brother and my sister-in-law fairly frequently to just talk. And this was one late July evening, late July. I remember because when I first saw this thing, I thought firework. No, it's 2 weeks after 4th of July. At any rate, I'm heading down. It's getting late. I have to go home. So I'm heading down this little street called Tosca. This is in Woodland Hills, very densely populated area. And I'm heading to my condo in Canoga Park, which is, I don't know, 10 miles away. So I'm just about to come around this. I'm coming around this hairpin corner. It's very steep. So you have to go maybe 2 or 3 miles per hour. And as I'm just coming around it, I see this bird dropping out of the sky and coming towards my car. That was my first thought. And I thought, no firecracker, because it clearly wasn't a bird. It was like a ball of light. And next thing I knew, this thing just kept coming and heading straight for me. It was like 300 feet away when I saw it, pretty high up, drops down, and it's right in front of my windshield. And it's going back and forth and back and forth. And maybe back once, kind of stopping and looking at me, darts straight forward, dips down a little bit and goes straight up. And I lean forward and I watch it go up through the trees. And man, I mean, not a reflection. This was just a little ball of light, like a golf ball. And not super bright, just kind of pleasing to the eye, really. And you know what happened? Nothing. I don't remember what happened. I honestly, this took me a while to actually realize too. I'd talk about this. I'm like, yeah, I saw a UFO, but it never really occurred to me. I don't remember driving home. And what I absolutely should have done or would have done if I was acting normal was turn around and go back to my brother and sister-in-law and say, you're not going to believe what just happened. You're not going to believe this. And I'm pretty sure I didn't do that because I don't remember that and they don't remember that. But I don't know. I've seen UFOs since. Usually I lie in bed that night and I'm like, wow, I'm going over and over and over it in my head. This I didn't remember till I'm not sure how much later, a year, a few months. It just popped into my head. I'm like, oh my God, I saw this thing. Tiny little thing. I mean, not your standard saucer type thing, but it came for me. This thing targeted me. No doubt in my mind.
Had you called upon it, do you think? Had you called upon something to see something?
I honestly think what happened was, and I kind of looked into this. I'm like, what? Could it be that it was my interest in UFOs that was drawing this thing? Because I was going door to door. I'd given my names to the police. I was a MUFON field investigator at this time. I had joined every UFO organization. I had put up flyers. I was camping out. I wanted to see these things. And I think there's this phenomena where the tables get turned a little bit. And if you start investigating UFOs, they investigate you. I've talked to a number of investigators where this has happened. And I first heard it with Ed Conroy, who decided he was going to see if Whitley Strieber was telling the truth and investigate his case. And just dived in and started interviewing Whitley and all his friends and family and started having his own encounters. So there's a contagion factor. I think that could be it.
Why do you think it's important? Why do you think it's an important subject?
I think it's vitally important for a number of reasons. And one being our tax dollars are being spent on this subject to not only study it, but to make witnesses look like idiots, liars, drug addicts, fools. Honestly, this is the official policy. It's not so much now, but it certainly was for decades with Project Blue Book and government study projects like the Condon Committee, which spent millions. So there's an enormous amount of money being spent in this. And the truth is, this has the potential to completely change the world. It's not only going to change everyone's worldview and really shake up, I think, religion and politics and really science and everything that we hold dear, arts and music. It's going to affect everyone profoundly when this comes rolling out into the full view. And the truth is, just one more thing real quick, is if we have this technology if we actually have crashed UFOs, and I think the evidence shows that we do, just based on the whistleblower accounts alone, but there's more. I mean, there's documents. It has the potential to solve the energy crisis, the economic crisis, and the environmental crisis all at once, some of which are largely manufactured. So that's why it's really important. People may say, oh, this doesn't affect me. I've never seen a UFO. Yes, it does. It affects you profoundly. This could have a huge impact on the poverty situation that we have, the unequal distribution of wealth. That can't go on. And that's partly tied to this.
Well, there's a lot of changes taking place on planet Earth right now, but is part of that a bigger disclosure, do you think? Do you think in your lifetime you'll see any disclosure that's sort of, what you're describing there?
Yeah, what I'm looking for is the Roswell craft. Honestly, I want to see it and the bodies, because the Pentagon saying, "Oh, UFOs are real," and look, here's a film and here's a pilot testimony, didn't do it. That was, in effect, disclosure. What I'm looking for is a world leader, the leader of that government, to say flat out, "This is real, and here's the proof." And I don't know if I'm going to see that. I'm going to be honest, I don't think that that's super likely, just based on my, I've been in this field for 35 years, and I've heard rumors before. There's this rumor going around now. Well, it's more than a rumor. Like in 180 days or so, less, there's going to be a major disclosure based on documents, but we'll see. I'm a little jaded because I keep hearing rumors and it never happens. And I want to see the craft. And to me, nothing less. I don't want to see a piece of metal. Don't show me a piece of metal. Don't show me any more videos, especially if they're fuzzy, because I know that they have excellent videos. They have the hardware. They have the bodies. They're being completely disingenuous by saying, "Oh, look, we have otherworldly materials, and here's a picture of a UFO."
Yeah, but do you think it's the case that if they've had the Roswell or parts of the Roswell craft for so many decades that even now they barely understand what it is?
Yeah, that's my understanding. I couldn't say for sure because that's a very difficult area of UFO research to sort of get any real meat, the UFO crash retrievals, because it's based pretty much entirely on eyewitness testimony, and often just one or two for each case. But yeah, from the testimony that's coming out, there are some craft that haven't even been able to get inside. There's some craft that go inside. There's no engine. We're like, how does this thing fly? There seems to be a mental kind of telepathic, perhaps, component to all of this. But yeah, we scratched the surface, and it does seem clear that some of our technology we owe to these UFO crashes. And Colonel Corso, in his book, Day After Roswell, is a major figure who was, I don't want to say debunked, because I don't think anyone successfully debunked him, but certainly has his retractors. But he's not the only one. There is a lot of people saying this. And, Robert Lazar was saying this, and he got viciously attacked. And now people are coming around. So it looks like for sure that...
Well, yes. I mean, the Robert Lazar, there was the documentary, wasn't there? The Bob Lazar documentary. But, still no proof that he went to where he says he went. And yeah, you can look online at the Bob Lazar story, and there's many people that have shown major holes in it. I actually met Tracy Lazar.
Oh.
Yeah, and she said it was just not true. She said she met Bob when she was 18, and what she said to me was that yes, you'd have thought if he had gone to the prestigious places he went to, he'd have had his certificates on the wall. And as far as she was concerned, Bob's biggest problem was prostitution and not ufology. And she was with him in that period, and she said she just never believed him for that, because she would have known, apparently. Well, then others would debunk her to say, well, what would she know? But she said she knew him very well.
Yeah. When you get become a major figure in this field, I think, particularly as an experiencer or certainly within government, that does draw a lot of people to you, to detractors and so on. So
Well, you
cases,
must have
yeah,
seen in this field, you must have seen a lot of disinformation over the years. Like, there's so many talk shows out there now. There's some big platforms as well, and the people that they put on, the credibility and the nonsense that they put forward. There's just no, it's just feeding people false hope.
yeah, curls my toes. I'm like, well, hey, what kind of when I hear something that's just completely off the wall and I've never heard before, I have to put that on the back burner. And there are some major, I'll call them researchers out there who are putting forth stuff that I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I can't disprove it, obviously, and I'm not going to name names, but yeah, we know for a fact that there are disinformation agents because some of them have come out. Like, wasn't it William Moore, the whole MJ12, and that was filled with disinformation and misinformation, but it's probably factually true. Much like the Lazar story, we are pretty certain that stuff is going on in Area 51. It's not resting on just Lazar by any means, not even close. So
No, I mean, you never know with
disinformation is a real problem.
these people if they're showing something on purpose, and and they put the story out there just to see what would happen if such a person saw such a thing. How much would they make up, or what would they do with that story,
Yeah.
or who knows, or it's just in the person's head. But I mean, I think, how do you choose the stories that you cover in your books?
I personally am most fascinated by people who've had very close encounters themselves, because there's all kinds of avenues for research in this field. I mean, you could spend your entire life investigating landing trace cases, or trying to figure out UFO propulsion, or the government cover-up. I mean, you can go on and on, but I started out by finding out that my family, friends, and coworkers were having encounters, and I knew they weren't lying, because these were people I loved and trusted and had known most of my life. And I couldn't reconcile that with what I thought was the truth. So that's how it kind of started out for me. And I began to get referrals and started writing articles. I wrote articles for 10 years before I put out my first book. I was a researcher for 10 years. So, and yeah, I mean, I always, I'm contacted by a lot of people, and you can sort of tell when someone's, very nervous to reveal their story, or their emotion is off the charts. It's pretty hard to fake this kind of thing. And so, I mean, there are various metrics I use to determine if someone's telling the truth. If they can have character witnesses. I love a multiple witness case because that's much harder to, pull a fast one. But it's been my experience. I have had a few people I'm like, I'm not sure. I don't trust what you're telling me. And a few kind of jokesters. But by and large, people that I'm approached by, I don't think are trying to pull up a hoax. They're very nervous. They're looking for information. Mostly what I get is people who are contacting me because they're having experiences and they are freaking out. And that's always my number one priority. Is not, oh, can I have your story? It's, how can I help you? What can I do to help you? Talk to me.
Are some of those people that are freaking out, are they the ones that have had abductions or just even sightings?
I would say it's mainly the onboard experiences, yeah, that can put someone into a real search for information. But not many people have dreams or a scar, or an implant that appears on an X-ray, or a close-up sighting can do it for sure. Absolutely. And I feel sorry for people who are like skeptics and suddenly are faced with this, because I can't imagine how that must be, having myself gone through just finding out secondhand, largely at least in the beginning, that UFOs were real.
Yes, so we've got the Tic Tac, I think that's what it was called, wasn't it? That's been part of the disclosure just recently, and that was confirmed, and that was a real s- experience for those fighter pilots. Not that we got to see all the video footage, but it's pretty incredible the maneuvers and speeds that whatever that was doing. Um, what would you say is some of the interesting cases that you've done? Because okay, we've covered that you've done 27 books and you've done some really amazing books, but could you name a few interesting cases that really you felt that this was something here?
There's so many, because I mean, it's been 35 years. One that always kind of feels special to me was the Topanga Canyon UFO wave, which I briefly mentioned. But that was on June 14th, 1992, when a bunch of people called the local police station. And this is the community where I grew up in. I wasn't living there at the time. I had just moved into Canoga Park. The Topanga Canyon is kind of along the Southern California coast near Los Angeles, near Malibu and Santa Monica. And I had written an article for the local newspaper. So they called me up and said, can you investigate? And this turned out to be an incredible wave of sightings in which UFOs were landing next to people's homes. They were chasing cars down the street. A car was lifted up. There were several abductions. So yeah, that was a real big case that kept me busy for 2 years, and I ended up putting out a whole book on just that. But that's kind of a conglomeration of a bunch of cases. One recent case that I keep thinking about for some reason is just a gentleman I interviewed, Ray Sachs, who was an electrician's mate on the USS Clamagore. And he contacted me. He's fairly elderly. He wanted to get his story out. He feels it's important, and I certainly do. And after verifying his employment and listening to his story, I'm like, wow. He was on the USS Clamagore, which carried nuclear missiles. That was not known at the time, but this is 1971, I believe it was, off the east coast of the United States. At nighttime, he's heading up the coast, several miles offshore. They're actually on the surface, and he's performing watch duty with another petty officer, and the commander is there in the second in command when this light starts shooting towards them. And it's underwater. This is a USO, and it comes from the stern at like 100 knots, faster than our subs, and starts pacing the submarine. They're moving at 12 knots or so, and this thing is right alongside them, which you don't do in seafaring with another conventional craft of any kind. You don't approach within a quarter mile. You just don't. And this thing was right off the side, huge. This white circle of light. I'm like, how deep? You couldn't really tell. And the commander's like, who is that? And he's joking, well, Captain Nemo. The commander was not amused, and says, well, what are the sonar guys seeing? And it was Ray's job to be in touch with sonar, and they weren't seeing anything. It was not appearing on their radar. And totally silent. One by one, the higher ranking officers came up on deck for a quick look-see at this thing as it's pacing along. It stayed with them for about 15 minutes, then darted off in another direction at, I think he said like 80 knots or 70 knots, somewhat slower, but still faster than our subs. And he's just jibber jabbering with the other watch, other guy in watch. The second in command turns to them and says, will you guys shut up? And the second in command turns to the commander. This is according to Ray Sachs, turns to the commander and says, sir, how would you like him to record this in the logbook? And the commander says, officers who report this sort of thing do not move up in rank. And so it was not recorded. Right? That's what I thought, because this is something I've heard before from other people, other Navy guys, that it doesn't go down into the official log. Sometimes it does manage to make it there, but usually not. So I have to guess that the commander told somebody. Otherwise, what are we doing? I mean, that makes no sense to me. But officially, nope, nothing was seen.
Mm. Do you think we will ever come to any sort of understanding of what this is, because, it's almost like if they wanted to be known, they would have shown themselves in some respects. I mean, they do, but not on, the masses, except for when there is maybe a crash. But even then, that could be gifted.
Right. I think we do know what we're dealing with here. And I think we've got a good handle on the agenda. And there's a lot of researchers out there who are speculating about time travelers and interdimensional beings. And, is this phenomenon demonic? And does it wear different masks? Is it an intelligence that is pretending to be extraterrestrial? There is a level of mystery to this for sure. But if you take a look at the evidence objectively, I would say the argument for extraterrestrials in the classic sense is overwhelming, because we've got these things showing up on radar. We've got these things burning people with radiation poisoning. We've got these things leaving landing traces, very heavy objects, or leaving radiation readings. We have got photographs, we've got moving films, we've got people being reported taken inside the report. I mean, that you go right down the line. It looks like we're dealing with extraterrestrials all the way to crash retrieval reports. I'm not saying all of these are extraterrestrials, but I'd say a good portion. And they've got a campaign to sort of publicize their presence. We see this through waves like Gulf Breeze, Hudson Valley, Phoenix Lights, the Topanga Canyon wave, Stevensville. There was a wave in Belgium, France. All across the globe, there are these waves of sightings. They're showing themselves off at schoolyards. I got 100 cases on that. I did a book on that. And same thing, just recently, I found out another way they're doing it. They're hovering over drive-in movie theaters during the movie. So they're showing themselves off. And I think if you talk to the people who've been taken on board and ask them what happened, you will get a handle on their agenda right away. We know why they're here. They're here for I would say 4 or 5 major reasons. Certainly there's a multitude of agendas. But by and large, we're seeing the single thing that most people experience is a physical examination. That's what most people report. And often reproductive material being removed, which leads to sort of the hybrid baby phenomena, which makes me cringe when I have to talk to skeptics, because I know how alien babies, half human, half alien, must sound, which is crazy. But that's the stories we're stuck with. I got one back in 1987 right away. One of my first cases involved that. That's one of their agendas. But beyond that, when someone is actually able to have a conversation with ETs beyond, don't be afraid, we won't hurt you, they are given warnings. And this is universal, stretching back to the modern age of UFOs, whether it's a contactee, a human-looking, or grays, or praying mantis. They have the same darn message, which is warnings of environmental destruction, disaster, upcoming difficulties with our planet. They warn against nuclear proliferation. That's huge. Against pollution, our warlike ways that we're going to destroy ourselves. I'm still getting cases like that. A lady I just interviewed, she lives in Maine. That's exactly what the ETs told her. Another Navy medic on a Navy ship, he was taken. That's what they told him. So that is one of their agendas, is to sort of alert us to the fact that we're on a path towards self-destruction. And second to that would be alternative energy. They seem to be very intent on informing people that we don't need to use fossil fuels and that there are alternative sources of energy. And then they show how they power the ship. They literally tell people, sometimes in great detail. Often, well, not often, but certainly consistently, they will let a person sit in the darn control chair and even tell them how to fly it, or actively, teach them how. And beyond that, I would say messages sort of fall into the range of what I would call spirituality. They talk about, this is very common, particularly healing. So many people come away with a very strong interest in what I would call psychic healing, hands-on healing, Reiki, but environmentalism, healing in any form. Also, out-of-body experiences, astral travel, past lives, psychic phenomena, channeling or just precognition. And this whole avenue, this whole umbrella of paranormal abilities, mediumship. People report levitating. A number of people have reported physically levitating following their experiences. So something is going on there.
These beings could be, significantly not just technology, well, not just advancement in technology, but a sort of advancement in spirituality as well, maybe.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're seeing, and I think that's what we would expect. I'm not going to say that these are all our space brothers by any means, because I don't believe that for a second. And in fact, when I came into this field, I was horrified. I'm like, oh my God, these hideous experiments. They're kidnapping people against their will. People are frightened out of their minds. And there is an element of that to this. What we see, looking at, again, being very objective about this, because this stirs up people's emotions. This is a core belief. It affects people like religion and politics. It hits home for people. And what I'm seeing is a bell curve of behavior that falls under the same umbrella as human behavior. Yes, they kidnap people, but you know what? When someone's kidnapped on Earth, it often ends very badly. And when someone's kidnapped by aliens, it's traumatizing, certainly. And I'm not going to rationalize it. I'm not, because that's my main problem with this. But I don't think it's intentionally trying to harm people. I don't think they're trying to frighten people.
But you did do a book on the healing power of UFOs, and I think this was 300 true accounts of what they thought was maybe a frightening experience. But I'm guessing when they look back, something was changed about them. Maybe they went through some sort of healing of the body, or what did you discover?
Yeah, precisely. This is why I'm like, gosh, maybe this isn't bad news. And I don't think it is bad news. I am not afraid of ETs. It's clear they're not trying to take over, because that would have been so easy and probably easier earlier than it would be now. And yeah, what we're seeing is, I documented some 300 healing cases. And mind you, this is not just coming from me. This is pretty much every major researcher across the board. And I won't say every, but every major one. Yeah. Barbara Lamb, Yvonne Smith, Bud Hopkins, John Mack, John Carpenter, David Jacobs. They all have these kinds of cases. They don't get a lot of discussion because they're a little bit fringy. And this is already a difficult subject to bring into the mainstream. And you start telling, oh, ET's cured me of cancer. The fact is, this is some great evidence. And there's some very outstanding evidence, medical evidence, not only injuries, but healings.
Yes, absolutely. And the question's got to be why? Why those particular people that have been healed? What is the connection?
Oh, I looked. Yeah, because that was kind of my number one question. I was asked it a lot, and I'm like, I don't know, because it's evenly divided between men and women. It can happen to little babies, to very elderly people, and I kept looking for patterns. It's not blood type, it's not race, it's not religion, but I found it. I found a pattern, a couple of them actually, and one is certainly: is this in your family history? Are they tracking your family? Because a lot of people have onboard experiences. We know it goes back generations. And if that's true, your chances of experiencing a healing are much larger. And I'm going to say 50% of the cases I documented fell into that category. By the way, 300 is, I'm sure, about less than 1% of what's actually going on, because most people aren't talking about this. But the other pattern I found is that actually profession, your vocation, your job. And by that, I mean, people who are doing good work for humanity in some capacity, this definitely increases your chances. Because I kept running into social workers. I'm like, well, here's another. That's odd. And then I started looking at it, I'm like, oh, inventors. And the ETs actually said, we're healing you because we're interested in your electronics invention work. And police officers, doctors, teachers, artists, people, who are sort of along that vein. That's a loose pattern, but it keeps turning up. Some are just a one-off. I don't know why, but they seem to have their reasons. And my guess is that this is much more widespread, and a lot of people are being healed and may not even know they're sick or attribute it to angels or spontaneous remission, which is a real thing. It's a medically verified phenomenon. Doctors don't know how to explain it.
Oh, gosh, yeah. I mean, even the idea that there's a connection somewhere, but an abduction connection in the past, but what about some sort of soul lineage connection? You can't even get your head around that. If that was true, and how they're able to tune
Yeah.
into that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, by the way, that's another category that I should mention, is that a number of people have been told flat out that, oh, you are one of us. You are us. You were with us in the past life. Some are told directly, and then that's why we're contacting you. Others are told they have a mission. Others are told, don't talk. And later they'll say, oh, please talk about us. Tell everyone. But it's interesting that
It is.
why?
What does that say about the nature of this reality? Is this some sort of thing that comes through like this because it's one way for them to present themselves and pierce through whatever this veil is, so that they can? It's almost like being in a simulation, isn't it? And they're part of it. Maybe I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying, well, it's just. I mean, to get your head.
No,
yeah.
I get what you're saying, because I feel like the universe itself is kind of matrixy. I mean, it's a little bit like a giant biofeedback machine to a certain extent. And perception, has a big influence on what we see. And it's all energy, and it's very hard to figure out. And I think this is what's leading people to think maybe these aren't even extraterrestrials at all. I'm like, no. I caution against that. I really do. Because where does that put us? What are we? Are we? I mean, we've got a pretty good handle that we're biological beings living on a planet, and that there are other planets out there. So it seems it's such a logical conclusion that there would be other life. And any theory that puts us at the center of the universe usually doesn't pan out in the end. And that's what I kind of walk away from the Jacques Vallée theory, where this is an intelligence that is tracking our culture and influencing our beliefs and pretending to be extraterrestrial. I think probably some are. I think for sure probably some are what we would think of as trickster spirits, or coming from places that would probably not be a planet as we would think of it, a higher dimension.
Well, yeah. I mean, what if it is from that higher dimension aspect? You know what I mean? It's almost crossing into the territory of where the soul goes when it. If we're a soul having a human experience, where do we come from? Where are we going back to? And is that the space it's coming from? And again, there's an agenda, isn't there? Because they've not made themselves known, and
Not yet.
no, not yet, not yet. I mean, we just can't be ready for it. Would we want it really? I mean, would most people want that to know that there's something out there that's whatever this is? Would it cut short some of their experiences that they've chosen to come here to experience?
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason that we're not seeing open official contact. It's my understanding, I'm just garnering from what experiencers have told me, that the ETs have told them, that the reason is our warlike ways and our prejudices, and the fact that we have to evolve on our own. We can't be handed the answers. This is sort of, there's a policy of non-interference, very much like Star Trek. Star Trek got a lot of stuff right. Kind of freaks me out.
Well, it kind of like, where did he get it from? I know he says he came up with the ideas, but did he, or did it flow through him? Do you know what I mean? Who knows? When he was, yeah, it's pretty incredible, isn't it? When you watch the new Star Trek, just like what the possibilities and stuff. Do you think, we've got Space Force now as well. Do you think there's a possibility that there's a reason for that more than just war?
I think that probably we do. Just based on what I've read, I don't have any firsthand testimony, and that's not my area really, because there are some researchers who are focusing just
Oh,
on
is that
that
right?
and
Are
looking
there?
at the research.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. Michael Salla, I think he wrote a book about it. I think that's his name. Um, Salas, no, Michael Salla. At any rate, I have talked to some whistleblowers. I mean, I have. One guy was a subcontractor who worked for the military and had a job at Edwards Air Force Base and accidentally saw a UFO in a hangar. And his boss, his employer, wouldn't tell him what it was. And just said, don't talk about it. You weren't supposed to see it. Shut up. And it wasn't until years or some time later that the same employer called him up, like, I have another job for you. And the guy, who I spoke to, who was on his deathbed in a hospital and wanted to get this out, says, I'm not going to I'm not going to do it, your job, unless you tell me what we saw. And his employer said, okay, that was a reversed technology from extraterrestrial craft. And this was a working UFO. So yeah, I'm guessing we're flying these things around. This is what I've been told. And that I think a space force is a logical conclusion. And I think it's probably been around for a while. This is what the reports are saying. And now we're just getting glimmerings of what's going on. But I think we're also seeing a lot of disinformation in this particular area as well. And because I'm looking at some of these stories, I'm like, no, I cannot swallow that. I just can't. Sorry. And yet there's things within their stories that are, I'm sure, are factually true because this is their MO. Let's give out a little bit of real information and then code it with nonsense. So,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely, I do. Absolutely. And okay, let's just go to one of your books as well. Oh, gosh, there's so many that you've got here. So, why the book UFOs Over Schools, and how did you find all those reports of all those different schools?
Yeah, it wasn't terribly hard. And I was really shocked. I mean, that one really shook me up a little bit when I found out that there were over 100 cases. There's a very well-known case of a UFO landing next to Ariel School in Rua, Zimbabwe. The kids talked to the ETs. 60 children saw this. This was a huge event. And I thought it was unique when I heard it. But I'm like, hey, wait, I have a couple of cases myself. And I started looking into it bit by bit because I heard about another sighting in Australia at the in Melbourne at Westall High School in 1966. And it landed next to the school. And 1 year later, this happened in Opelika, Florida at Crestview Elementary. And then I found out there was a very famous case up in Wales where, yeah, a UFO landed next to the school. Sometimes on the playground, these things are. So I dug in and I found 100 cases. And half of these are elementary schools. These are not normal sightings. This is not a flyby. These are targeted areas. The schools are being specifically targeted. And I say that because the objects are coming to within a few hundred feet in most of these cases, or landing. 30% of the cases they're landing or humanoids are seen. These are long-lasting sightings, and they're putting on a display for a large group of mostly school children, but often adults. It's anywhere from 30 people to 400. And it's a very sort of...
I wonder if they're actually, grabbing onto that idea you said earlier on that they're observing lineages, in connections with them, even on a soul level at that age.
Perhaps, but why would they show themselves to everybody? I think this is a display type of behavior we're seeing, and because it's not super common, but sometimes they want to be seen. And I think it's a campaign. Honestly, I think it's a publicity campaign to announce their presence. And it's a kind of a very sneaky way to do it. Like, okay, how can we do this without, freaking out everybody? Well, let's show themselves off to kids. What are they going to do? They're going to tell their parents. Their parents aren't This is probably not going to get into newspapers, though it often did. But it was kind of a sneaky way to sort of get under the radar there and still get their message across.
Yeah. I just don't know if I'd be ready for it. Do you know that? I mean, I've had a UFO experience. My whole family had a UFO experience, right? God, it was just so weird. And, talking about it's not so easy neither because even when we're together, we've all got different recollections but we know it happened. That's the cool thing. We know it happened. But what did it change in my life? Was there missing time? A bit like your scenario with your personal experience as well. If we're not going to have a regression, or I guess there must be a reason for it. There has to be. I mean, to come all that way, or crossing dimensions and stuff like that. You know what I mean? There has to be something, unless it's just observing. But
I think some are. Yeah, I think some are like your average tourist or scientist. But some are clear. I mean, it's clearly more than that. They're obsessed with humans. They are taking animals. They're picking plants, flowers, all kinds. I've talked to people who've seen, forests on board UFOs, or certainly have found accounts of that, or zoos, what amounts to alien zoos. And they know more about the human body than we do. They're curing incurable diseases, quote, incurable diseases. So yeah, whatever their thing is, they are all about us. They love us. They are so interested in humans and humanity and Earth. As far as I can tell, they're out there in very large numbers. NUFORC, the National UFO Reporting Center, and MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, receive a dozen reports a day. And I know from experience that 1 in 10 people make an official report. 1 in 100 would be more honest, but let's say 1 in 10, which would mean that there's 200 reports a day. That's a lot. That's an ongoing phenomena, never ending. Right now, someone's seeing a UFO, guarantee it.
yeah, and it's crazy, isn't it? You look up and there's nothing there. But what if we're just not looking with the right type of instrumentation? I mean, obviously our eyes can only see a certain spectrum, a certain frequency range, but I mean, if you could just fine tune it a bit, I wonder if it's a busy skies up there, that it's
Yeah, it is. Get night vision binoculars, and because that's a thing now. People are like, hey, get some high grade, especially, but any night vision binoculars, and you'll see stuff moving up there. That's probably not a satellite if it's turning or stopping or dividing. You know what I mean? So yes, and I think they have the ability. UFOs. I mean, we know this. There's cases straight out of Blue Book and that confirm this, that these things can turn invisible. They can't see them, yet they're appearing on radar and hovering right over a Colorado Springs airport. And they couldn't see it. It was invisible. And we know that they can show themselves off to select persons within a group of people.
Well, that's
I've got several cases
crazy,
like
isn't
that.
it? That's a crazy understanding, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. Okay.
They're advanced. I mean, these guys, that's the one thing I think most people that I've interviewed agree upon, because some say, oh my gosh, I think they're demonic. That's very rare, actually. In my latest book, Onboard Encounters, I have 15 cases. One guy's like, pretty sure they're demonic. One guy's pretty sure they're angelic. One guy's pretty sure that this is, the Jacques Vallée phenomena that wears different masks. In his case, I have to wonder, because he's got a wide variety of paranormal. But most of these people feel like we're dealing with extraterrestrials in the classic sense. They really do.
Yeah. What sort of personal transformation have you gone through in your life, do you think, with looking into this subject?
Oh, huge. Yeah, this was a very difficult transition initially. Gosh, I mean, I'm happy now because I feel like, the wool's been pulled. I can see the light. I felt scandalized initially. I felt lied to by not only my family, friends, and coworkers, but the government. I couldn't believe there was a cover-up. I came into this field extremely naive. So it wasn't only a transformation of my worldview, but honestly, I had a spiritual transformation around that same time, which I think is somehow tied into this. because it wasn't just UFOs. I started interviewing people. I have written 27 books, but 5 or 7 of them are on ghosts or levitation or Bigfoot or out-of-body experiences. And I did, ghost hunting, and I saw ghosts. I'm like, oh, what? Out-of-body experiences are real? Well, let's try that, because that's something I can do. And got really good at it. I wrote a book about that. So yeah, it's had a huge spiritual transformation on myself for sure.
I mean, it's just very difficult. I mean, in my head, I'm like, Christ, what's it teaching us? Can it? I mean, I'm all about self-improvement and trying to become a better version of you, or and to live a happy, fulfilled life. Do you know what I mean? As well. And if
Right.
you're doing what you're doing and it's happy, that's fantastic. Just keep doing it. Do you know what I mean? Keep knocking it out with the wonderful books you're doing, and but I guess it's not everyone's cup of tea, but like you're saying, as you said earlier on, it is a lot more mainstream than it's ever been, this subject.
Yeah, and I think it will at some point. Disclosure is ramping up. I think the cat's out of the bag. I can't see this going backwards, and I don't think the UFOs are going to go away. And I think at some point, people are going to be like, "Oh, did you hear about the sighting? Yeah. What's on TV? What else is on TV?" you know, it's going to become an accepted part of society, and we're almost there. Honestly, we are almost there. I think we could handle disclosure. I do. I think we could handle open official contact. Yeah, it'll shake things up. And I'm not sure if we're quite ready for it. I would like to see peace on Earth, but are we? That's kind of naive.
Well, I think you can find peace within yourself, though. It may not be around you all the time, but if it's within you, then that's a start for the people that are around you. Do you know what I mean? If you can find that.
Yeah, and I think that's how it starts. Society starts with the individual, and people should stop trying to, worry about others and really start worrying about yourself. And I think we'd be a lot better off. And because there's no reason, and we're all the same all over the world. It's ridiculous, these so-called divisions that we have, because I think they're being intentionally fostered by a force on our planet that is trying to retard progress spiritually, technologically, and humanity as a whole. I think I'm hopeful for how this all rolls out. I think we're up for some real problems up ahead. But I think ultimately we're gonna come together. We're a resilient species. We've been improving for hundreds of years. We've made great strides this last 100 years. So I'm pretty excited about where we're heading.
Do you think there's still crafts that fall out of the sky, that come down and are retrieved? Do you think that's still going on much? Did it ever go on much? Was it always very rare, or?
I would say it probably was very rare up until the modern age of UFOs, which seems to have been incited by our own indiscriminate use of nuclear weapons and nuclear testing, which this is, not me saying this is a number of researchers, but I agree, because the ETs keeps giving that warning. That brought them in large numbers, and since then, yeah, lots of crashes and probably still ongoing.
If we're getting
And
warned, if people going on these crafts or in their own abductions, and through recollection, they're showing scenarios of where Earth may project to, if we don't help to reduce, the damage that we do as a sort of species. But are they giving any sort of hints of of how to get there? Do you know what I mean? I mean, that's the difficult thing, isn't it?
yeah, I don't think they're going to hand us the answers, but they are certainly pointing out the problems. And I think their major message over and over is the nuclear proliferation and the warlike ways. And that seems to be very strong. And I think this is why they contact people who are like musicians. That is a huge, yeah, John Lennon. It's just one example, but Demi Lovato recently said, Miley Cyrus. I'm not. There's a list of musicians. Pink Floyd, I think. Gosh, Grateful Dead. Uh, I, I think maybe, but there's a lot, and there's a reason, because these musicians are able to reach a large number of people. And so ETs are doing what they can without actually landing and saying, you know what, we're going to be your alien overlords. You've screwed this up. You can't do it anymore. They're not going to do that. I think they may intervene in certain situations. That's certainly what we're seeing on a limited basis in terms of healing and education. But are they going to take over? I don't think so, unless we absolutely are on the path to complete destruction. They might take us and save us, because there's a number of people who keep telling me that, like, oh yeah, they're preparing to evacuate large portions of the population in case, things go south. And you hear that once, and you're like, huh. You hear that 5, 10, 20 times, it starts to raise eyebrows. I'm like, all right, gosh. So that's a possibility.
You've obviously got a number of interesting cases that you've looked into. What was the one that that still puzzles you to this very day, in a sense? Was it the one you've spoken about, or is there another one?
There are so many cases. They all kind of puzzle me, but here's an interesting one. This lady I interviewed, who has since passed away, she was a really great witness. She was a real estate agent and then became a counselor, a psychologist. So a well-educated person, and just very kind and nice. She's like, oh yeah, I've had sightings my whole life. I was a little girl. They chased me across the field. I was scared out of my mind until a beam of light hit her. As soon as that beam of light hit her, she was ecstatic. She felt great. And they sucked her right up in, and that's all she remembers. But one experience she told me, I'm like, wow, I have never heard this. She was driving through the Watchung Mountains, I think they're called, in New Jersey. And it was in the middle of the night. She's on an old motorbike. This was some years back. It had a Kickstarter. And it was late at night. It's a pretty remote area. And she crashes. And she bangs up her bike pretty bad. She's fine for the most part, a little bruised. But the Kickstarter is bent so that she cannot start her bike. And she's on this remote road. She's like, what am I going to do? It's the middle of the night. This is bad news. And she says, these figures showed up. She never saw a UFO, but suddenly there was these two guys. And she says they looked almost naked, or were wearing jumpsuits. They must have been wearing jumpsuits. She says they looked almost human. They didn't have any hair, but they didn't have huge heads, but they were pale skin, large dark eyes, and didn't say a word to her. One of them picked up the bike, and the other kind of looked at her and warded her off. And one of them bends down and starts fussing with the Kickstarter. They didn't have any tools that she could see. It just sort of bent the Kickstarter back into shape with his hands, or mentally, I guess, and set the bike back up. And they stepped away to the side of the road and motioned for her to get on the bike. And she did. And she took off. She didn't look back. And she regrets to this day, not making a little more of this experience. But she says it was actually pretty scary because they weren't human. And she knew they weren't human. And she's never had this kind of fully conscious, like, here we are type of encounter. And it's just so bizarre.
Only she can prove that experience to herself. Do you know what I mean? Which is the case for a lot of these, UFO experiences. You start describing some of them, and unless you were there to witness it.
Yeah, but if you talk to these people, and you start talking to their family, they're like, "Oh yeah." And most people who see a UFO, by the way, are not alone. They usually have someone with them, because that's how people usually are. Few people are, loners, complete loners. They're usually, if they're, out somewhere, they're with someone. If they're driving, they're with someone. And the average number of witnesses, like 4, I think it is, according to Newfork. It's a little less in my own files, but yeah, most people are have a witness. And people who are having onboard experiences do have physical evidence. Often they can point to a scar. Many of them have gone to the doctor, and the doctor's like, well, this is strange. We've got this object in your sinus. Or did you break your foot? You've got metal, what look like metal pins. Or, what's this object here in your lung? One lady, I had interviewed had been diagnosed with tuberculosis as a young child and had to have yearly x-rays, and had an encounter, and the doctor's like, oh my God, what is this in your lung? It was this giant metal ring. So the girl's like, no, I don't know. She kind of knew, but she didn't want to tell the doctor. And he's like, well, we'll just keep an eye on it. I have no idea what this could possibly be. You didn't, breathe in a key ring or anything, did you? She's like, well, no. And it couldn't have been that. It was way deep at the bottom of her lung. And this is fairly regular with people who have onboard experiences. They leave a long trail of mystified and puzzled and sometimes angry doctors.
I can imagine. Yeah, it's just bloody fascinating, isn't it? You've also, done books where you talk about UFOs over prison. You discover, talk about Bigfoot. But how many sort of UFOs over prison get actually reported then by inmates?
A surprising number. That was one of my specialties, I think, is to look for patterns. Like, has anyone looked into this? And one thing we certainly know is that there are UFO attractors. Certain areas, certain events attract UFOs. And researchers have known this for years, that missile launches have a high number of UFO sightings, or Air Force bases, or nuclear power stations. And so anything that sort of speaks towards technology, perhaps, seems to draw them in. And, definitely schools, but prisons, for sure. I think they're like curious about what is going on. Why are these electrified fences? And I've talked to a prisoner who was visited in his cell. And I know of cases of people taken from their cell and put back in, by the way. The ETs did not do a jailbreak. But yeah, they're hovering over prisons. Colorado State Prison has been visited 4 times. And in cases that I found documented through MUFON or various UFO reporting centers. I'm guessing it's a lot more than that. If I found 4.
And then you've got the
one prison.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It makes no sense, does it? But that's what they've reported. And then obviously you've got the UFOs over the drive-ins, which I was pretty surprised at that.
Yeah, that was another real shock, honestly, because I thought I had gotten a pretty good handle on things after 35 years, but no, this thing, it just has layers and layers of mystery to it. And I had this lady, I interviewed years ago. It was like, oh my God, it came right down over this, or next to the screen at the Paramount Drive-In. This is 1971 in Paramount, California. And it cleared out the drive-in. This was right next to the screen. And I thought it was a one-off. I'm like, wow, that's an amazing, unique encounter. Until I wrote UFOs over Colorado. I've written books about a number of states. And I kept running into them. And then in Colorado, I ran into 3 of these drive-in theater cases in a row. I'm like, oh, let's look at this. Let's look. And I found none in books. I found one, actually, 1 or 2 in, the whole UFO literature. But once I started scouring UFO databases, and particularly newspapers from the 50s and 60s and 70s, which was really the heyday of the drive-in, I started running into these amazing cases that nobody has ever examined, really.
That's incredible. Yeah, did you have to go back into like microfilm or something to find this stuff, or?
No, I would have back, in the 80s. That's what we were, it was libraries and magazines, but now the internet is a remarkable tool. And you can go, like the Blue Book files, you can access those in their entirety. And that's where I found some. Some of these cases were rooted. Here's a case that just freaked me out. Terrorist drive-in, 1952, I think it was. And this is in Bakersfield, California. Lieutenant Jenkins is in the audience when a UFO drops out of the sky and hovers over the screen. That's what they always do, 50 feet, 10 feet above it, or right next to it on either side, which is, clearly to me, they're showing off because it flashes its lights and it darts away like a bullet. So he calls the local police station, and the deputy, Leroy Hatfield, takes his testimony. The phone rings again. Deputy Hatfield takes another testimony, finally goes down to the theater. There's still 100 people there. And they're like, oh my God, I saw it. And he takes the testimony of 30 people, writes a report up, sends it off to the Air Force. It's sent off to Edwards Air Force Base, which is very close. And a Blue Book guy takes the report, and it's routed past Blue Book. This one didn't actually hit Blue Book proper. It was routed to Wright-Patterson, to the Air Technical Intelligence Command, which is where we reverse engineer or study foreign technology, rather, but also to Ent Air Force Base in Colorado and the Director of Intelligence in Washington, D.C. This is 1952. They knew from the beginning this was real. From the beginning.
Do you think they're still looking into it now? Do you think there's some high level somewhere in some parts of governments throughout the world that actually have some sort of interest in activity?
Oh, are you kidding? Of course. Yes, we know this for sure. This is not speculation. We know this from the Freedom of Information Act that all the intelligence agencies, certainly in the United States, but we know as well as France and England and Canada, all have a very strong and ongoing interest in this subject, which is often ranked, top secret or above. Paul Hellyer, former defense minister of Canada, said flat out, UFOs are real. Multiple species are visiting us. This is not speculation anymore. We have the documents to prove that our intelligence agencies have been actively investigating this for decades and are still doing it. ATIP, that's the latest one that's coming out from the Pentagon. Advanced Aero Threat, detection.
Do you think they're among us now? Do you think they're walking among us? And they look like us, some of them do. Some of these hybrids actually look like us.
Yes, I do. And the reason I say that is because we have eyewitness reports that say that. Very credible ones. There's a very well-known case from John Salter and his son, who had a typical missing time abduction, but had a very strange event at the gas station right before it happened, where this tiny little figure wrapped up in glasses and a fisherman's cap and gloves was looking at them with beady little eyes and followed them all the way to their abduction site and then turned off, and that's when they got abducted. And this turns up in case after case after case. There's a case from New York where a girl was being followed around by this creepy fella. He walked up to her at the school, right in front of the school, and tried to entice her into the field, into his white vehicle, and was asking all kinds of weird questions. And he was very strange looking, strange clothes, weird eyes, pointy ears, just off. Then she saw him again at a convenience store, a liquor store. He was staring at her with those weird eyes. Finally, she was taken on board a UFO, and there he is. There's that same guy. So yes, they are among us. And the fact is, there are a good portion of reports of people who are taken on board, and they see human-looking ETs, human-looking, just like us. So I would think it would be incredibly naive to say that no, they're not walking among us, when we not only know that some of them look like us, but we have multiple eyewitness testimony. In every book I've written on every state, there are those testimonies of people like seeing these guys walking among us in some way.
If you had to if you had to make a documentary on some of the cases that you've covered, which would make for you an interesting documentary to do?
Oh gosh, I would love to do one on the schoolyards, because I think that's been totally, not covered as much as it should have, the schoolyard sightings. But for that matter, healings, because there's a wide segment of the population who think this UFOs are demonic, or maybe not very nice at all. And I'm like, well, there's a very benevolent aspect to this. I would love to do that. Or USOs. That's been ignored for up until now, really, there's only been a few researchers who have really dived deep into the USO. Yeah, pun intended.
And when you call that's called the unidentified submerged objects, the underwater version of
Yeah,
UFOs. Yeah.
can't can't call them a UFO if they're not flying. So, I mean, why don't we just call them alien craft? I mean, because they're now calling them UAPs, and that's not going to catch on. Because everyone calls them UFOs. They're always going to be known as UFOs, but really, they're alien craft. I think we know what they are, at least most of them.
There must be a reason why contact on the masses has not been made, and it must be for our highest good. Right now, that's all I can think. Um, it just must be.
That's what that
Yeah.
is. Remember, there's an Israeli general or some guy high ranking in the Israeli army just came out and said, "Oh yeah, we're in contact with ETs, but they say we're not ready." And there's a galactic federation and so on.
Well,
And I'm
that's
like,
what he
well,
said, but then he got debunked. I believe he was taken out of context. But then was he, or did he have to say that in the end? Just to, he shouldn't have said what he said. Who knows, right?
yeah,
Who
well, we
knows?
do see backpedaling
Y-
when these things happen.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Yeah, I think the Roswell case was really interesting, and I interviewed quite a few people that were to do with that case. That like Donald Schmidt, the people that have interviewed people in the past that were actually there. I mean, that's such a documented case, isn't it? That something happened there. It really did
yeah,
take place. Yeah.
yeah. I
Um,
talked to Jesse Marcel Jr. Yeah, there's what 100 books on that case. There's almost 1,000 witnesses. I think there might be, and the Air Force has actually put out their 2 books, and one. I mean, it's a joke the way they've tried to debunk this. It is absolutely a valid case. It's the grandfather of all cases. I think it's not gonna go away. I know people think Roswell's a dead horse, but I'm gonna keep beating it until I see it in a museum. Show me the craft. What's the big deal? People could handle that, I think. But if disclosure, yeah, open official contact, you're right. That would shake things up. And I'm not sure we're entirely ready, but I think we have to move towards that direction.
well, politically, we're not ready, are we? So, even on earthly things like that. So, extra dimensional stuff, I don't know. We soon get into the worship mode, don't we? Sometimes, like, if we. It's people get very addicted sometimes, don't they, to other people's truths, and they don't want to, come up with their own or try to find their own answers. So, I mean, if something was highly
Yeah,
evolved that was around us like that, would we see it as a god? I guess we would.
I'm sure there's going to be a segment. Yeah, there's going to be a segment who'll run for the hills, and some will say demonic, some will say angelic. But I
Some
think
Yeah, some will
that we're
shoot.
developed.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we see that all the time. I wrote about that. People will shoot at a UFO. Don't do it. They sometimes shoot back. But yeah, I think we've dealt with enormous tragedies, humanity for centuries. Whether it's the Black Plague or the Cuban Missile Crisis or the whole nuclear proliferation and AIDS and just wars, and we've got famines and hurricanes and tidal wave. We've always bounced back, and this would be just another thing. And I think we're seeing it. I mean, it is infiltrated our society. We're saturated in terms of media. It's in videos, it's in advertising. It's the top grossing movies have aliens in them. That's what science fiction is all about, is aliens. So they're here, and they've already invaded, I think, uh, if you want to look at it that way, because it has become a part of our culture. It's cemented into our culture at this point.
Yes, there's no going back with that. Absolutely, there's not. And who knows when the era of disclosure will be? Whether it's decades, centuries from now. Who knows? It's interesting. What keeps you going in this field? What keeps you doing this work?
I don't know. I sometimes need a break, honestly, because it gets a little overwhelming. But I can't. Once it grabs you, it's hard to pull out, and it's just fascinating, the potential of it. I mean, I've seen a number of UFOs. not just that one I described. I mean, there's been others, and it's thrilling when that happens, and it really wakes you up to the fact that, oh my gosh, this is absolutely real. And I don't know. I think it's in my family. To some level, I think I myself have had contact, so that's certainly a driver for me.
I mean,
But
isn't it incredible when you look at the infinite universe and just the idea of getting in your head that it's infinite? I mean, most of us can't
yeah,
project that in thought, can we? That what goes on forever? How can something go on forever that we don't even know where it came from? It's got no end. Um, that's
yeah,
pretty mind-boggling, isn't it? Just like what is in the infiniteness, far deep inside.
exactly. Yeah, and ETs are part of that because they're a clear signal, like that we're not alone. And maybe they're time travelers. That keeps coming up. There's been a number of I mean, I could march out cases that would support that. They certainly do have the ability to affect time in ways that we can't, because people report everything stopped around them, but they're moving. And people report compressed time, or elongated. They will have a very long experience and come back to the moment that they were taken. And just weirdness. So if ETs have the ability to travel at the speed of light, well, that is the speed of time as well. So I think that's why we're seeing sort of what I would call time anomalies, which probably speaks towards missing time to a certain extent. Uh, yeah, there's like you said, it's a mystery wrapped in a riddle, surrounded by an enigma. There's just layers and layers of mystery to this.
Yeah, I could go with time travel a little bit as well because I mean, would that then stop them from too much interference? But then again, look at all the cases that you've done, 27 books. How much interference do you want? Do you not want? Do you know what I mean? If they're from the future or from the past, yeah, because they've already interfered, or maybe this is maybe they're trying to help their own people, like you say, from some lineage, even if they are. But I mean, it just sounds, it's yeah, there are no answers. That's what's annoying about an interview like this because there are none, and it's just the opening of your mind that there may be something more, and don't be so close-minded. I guess that's is that the point of this?
Yeah, I think to a certain extent, I think we do have the answers, and that's what really bothers me. And that's one of the things that does keep me in this field. Is like, I mean, we have the ships, we have the bodies. If that's true, all bets are off. And as far as I can tell, we do have that. And there's a certain segment of the population who knows for a fact UFOs are real because they can see the craft or they've seen them repeatedly.
What would that do to the enemies of America or any other countries that have got them, to have that out in a museum, on display? I mean, it's gonna be the most sought after thing that any country would want to get their hands on, or any terrorist group or any sort of secret service part of a company would want country sorry would want their hands on that sort of stuff, wouldn't they? You just can't go releasing that, can you? I mean, if it's there, but then again, you're saying, well, why not? Well, wouldn't it
Yeah,
be the case that we know that we've been lied to so much? Wouldn't that destroy? Are we ready for that?
yeah. But that's exactly the crux of this problem here, because if they don't disclose, our government and governments across the world, they will lose all credibility because we know they're lying. We know it. And this has been a pattern of governments of deception and lies and corruption. And this is what causes governments to fail, to fall, and to fracture. When the public loses complete trust in a government, there's a revolution. And so this is to their government's own benefit to disclose.
Okay, so they
They want to remain in control of this problem. They better do it. They better.
Okay, they say they disclose. We don't understand their technology. Even 5 years from now, it's just so beyond our understanding. Whatever this is, right? It's like giving it to a bunch of ants, right? I guess it would give people more oomph, I guess, to want to explore space. maybe that there's something else out there that maybe is friendly, and that when we're ready, they'll be ready. Um, maybe does it? Yeah, I
Yeah,
guess.
there's a lot to this
Yeah.
because I mean, what about abductees? People who are being taken regularly. If the government says, "Oh, UFOs are real and here's the craft," then if you're being regularly taken by aliens, you would appeal to your government. And this could be one of the reasons they're like, "Oh, we can't disclose because this is a can of worms." And yeah, it is. But they've painted themselves into a corner, and it's their own darn fault. But no more. You cannot lie to people like this. It's not a feasible pathway to the future. It's just not.
No, I'm with you there.
So yeah,
I'm totally with you there. It's we have a lot of problems just down here, especially right now. We got pandemics and all sorts of political upheaval right now. And yes, maybe something like this would be very healing, to know that we are part of something much bigger, much bigger.
yeah,
You
we
know.
could finally put all our science and industry towards exploring this instead of covering it up. Can you imagine spending money to make witnesses look stupid or spending money to retard the progress of this field? That's what our tax dollars are going to. There still is an active cover up, and that's got to stop. It's just got to stop.
Well, just before you go, what would you say, and you probably said this already, but what would you say, Preston, is the most important message of your work?
I would say that this is not a phenomena that we need to be afraid of because it's been around for thousands of years. We know this from petroglyphs and cave paintings, from rock carvings, from middle-aged paintings and hieroglyphics. And they haven't taken over yet. They were modern back then. So I don't think this is something we have to be afraid of. I think if you look at it, there's very good things in store for us with this phenomena. I don't think it's going to go away. I think we're going to have open official contact at some point. This generation, perhaps, or the next after that, but not much beyond that, because it's far too saturated at this point. So that's what I would leave the message with is, don't worry, things are going to be fine. Let's just come together and love each other. And that will, I think, aid our progress and open us up to the galactic community, which is out there waiting for us. All we have to do is grow up a little bit, and we're so darn close. We can solve our problems. It's not that hard. Love is the answer.
Love
It
is
really
always the
is.
answer. Yeah, love is always the answer in most
Just
situations. It's just, yeah, learning to come
act with
from that space. Yeah.
acting with kindness and knowledge. Inform yourself and act with love, and we will solve our problems very quickly.
Well, Preston, just thank you so much for joining us right now. I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
Hey, pleasure. Thank you. Had a blast.